Officers will tell you the last thing they want to do is get physical when arresting someone or controlling an inmate.
But it does happen. You know this. Some places a little more than others.
So a community watchdog investigation by Nate Morabito uncovered exactly which departments use the force the most and found one agency has punished officers and even fired some for excessive force. Nate?
Yeah, that's right. From 2010 to 2012, the Washington County Sheriff's Office in Tennessee used force the most among the largest law enforcement agencies, 517 times. Sullivan County came in a close second. For both, most of those cases stemmed from their jails. When it comes to road officers, Kingsport led the list, followed by Bristol, Tennessee, Johnson City, and Sullivan and Washington counties. So what kind of force, and was any of it excessive? These are the faces of people who just wouldn't cooperate. 1 out of 4 were on the receiving end of the Washington County Sheriff's Office's chemical spray.
It only occurs if the subject doesn't obey the commands of the officer that's giving it to him.
Sheriff Ed Graybeal says they could have avoided it had they just listened.
It's a reaction to what someone that you ask could do if they don't follow that order, to just keep everybody safe.
The sheriff says his officers only use chemical spray if physical presence, verbal warnings, and verbal commands don't work. Still, it's been their go-to option. The department's reports revealed employees used the spray 401 times, roughly twice as much as the other agencies combined. The sheriff says it's because his detention officers are in constant contact with inmates. He says supervisors have reviewed every case and found every time the officers' actions were justified. 401 uses of chemical spray. That sounds like a lot.
When you have 700, 715 people, they're living with them. And tempers flare and things go wrong, and our guys do an excellent job, trained very well to take care of that thing just as soon as it happens.
When it comes to stun guns, Johnson City used that kind of force more than anyone else, 61 times over a 3-year period. Part of the reason, more than half of the officers here carry a stun gun.
We think it's appropriate the times that we've used it.
As a result, Major Carl Turner says officers have had to put their hands on suspects fewer times, resulting in fewer workers' comp claims for the city. He says people often leave them with no choice but to pull the trigger.
We saw many subjects who were under the influence of bath salts who were really uncontrollable.
When it comes to getting physical, Kingsport police used physical force the most among police departments, 92 times.
If you're struggling, you're trying to get away, and I have to take you to the, I take you all the way to the ground. There's no injury, but the use of force is minimal, but we document it.
Like other agencies, even when the use of force is minimal, Kingsport fills out a report. The chief says the force is always reasonable. If there's any doubt, he says supervisors review every report, and when needed, like in this case back in 2010, they suggest ways officers can learn from an incident.
You can't forget, the basics of that police officers have been taught for years, and that's just the basic wrist locks and things of that nature, which are very effective.
All of the agencies we asked said they haven't disciplined a single officer for excessive force during the time frame we looked at, and all said they had 0 substantiated complaints of excessive force, except Sullivan County.
Over 15 years, I've had to let some people go because of excessive force. And it's not something you want to do, but there's no use in being excessive about it.
Sheriff Wayne Anderson talked candidly about those rare cases.
If it sounds like a complaint that needs to be investigated, we investigate it.
He says he just won't stand for his officers crossing the line. Over the last 2 years, his department has fired 2 employees, a patrol officer and corrections officer, after internal investigations revealed they used too much force. He also suspended 2 other employees and placed them on probation.
We all have tempers, everybody does, but we all have to be professional. And we've been trained to be professional, and they do the best that they can do.
Still, despite those unusual cases, the sheriff says his department's use of force is almost always justified, even though his employees have had to use physical force more than any other agency.
It's not bad when you arrest several thousand a year.
When you compare the number of arrests to the number of times force was used, at every agency it equals or is less than 1.5% of the time, except for Bristol, Tennessee, which uses force 4% of the time. Why? The numbers suggest Bristol uses force more often than anyone else. The chief there says his department's mandate for reporting force could be more stringent than other departments.
It's the reality of what we do for a living.
Back in Washington County, Sheriff Graybill is proud of his numbers. Still, he says officers don't take it lightly. After all, any officer who fires chemical spray knows how it feels. To be able to carry it, they had to feel its effects firsthand. Nate Morabito, News Channel 11, in your corner.
Nate also looked at which departments had to fire their guns the most. All but Washington County had to use their firearms at least once. During that time, Kingsport and Sullivan County, they said that the people who were shot were killed, but internal investigations cleared the officers involved of any wrongdoing. We have plenty more to tell you about in terms of our investigation. You can log on to WJHL.com for web extras.